Charles Whitmore was a name that commanded attention. Known for his sharp suits, sharper tongue, and an empire built on sheer determination, he was the epitome of success, or so it seemed. At 47, Charles had risen from modest beginnings to become one of the wealthiest men in the world. He owned luxury properties across the globe, traveled in private jets, and rubbed shoulders with celebrities and politicians. But behind the polished exterior lay a man who thrived on control, power, and perfection. On this particular morning, Charles stood at Gate 32 of JFK Airport, tapping his foot impatiently as he waited to board his flight to London. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, he exuded authority even among the bustling crowd. His phone buzzed incessantly with emails and calls, but he ignored them all. This trip wasn't just another business venture. It was personal. He was set to finalize a multi-million-dollar deal with a tech giant, one that would solidify his legacy as an unstoppable force in the corporate world. As the gate agent announced boarding, Charles adjusted his cufflinks and strode toward the plane with the confidence of someone who always got what he wanted. First-class passengers were ushered in first, and Charles took his assigned seat by the window without sparing a glance at the person beside him. To him, everyone else was background noise, mere extras in the movie of his life. The cabin crew greeted him warmly, offering him champagne before takeoff. Charles accepted with a curt nod, barely acknowledging their presence. As the plane prepared for departure, he leaned back in his seat, scrolling through documents on his tablet. Everything had to go perfectly. There was no room for error, no space for distractions. That's when she caught his attention. Seated beside him was a young woman, her swollen belly unmistakable beneath her loose sweater. She looked tired, her dark skin glowing softly despite the exhaustion etched on her face. Her hands rested protectively over her stomach as she shifted uncomfortably in her seat. Charles frowned slightly. He hadn't noticed her earlier, but now her presence irked him. How could someone like her afford first class? It didn't make sense. In his mind, people like her belonged in economy, not sharing his airspace. For a moment, curiosity flickered in his thoughts. Who was she? Why was she here? But Charles quickly dismissed these questions. He didn't care about her story. All he cared about was ensuring nothing disrupted his plans. Yet something about her quiet demeanor unsettled him. Perhaps it was the way she seemed unfazed by the opulence around her, or how she carried herself with dignity despite her obvious discomfort. Whatever it was, it gnawed at him in a way he couldn't quite explain. Little did Charles know, this seemingly ordinary encounter would spiral into chaos, unraveling everything he held dear. For now, though, he simply sipped his champagne, oblivious to the storm brewing just inches away. The young woman seated beside Charles was Maya Johnson, a 28-year-old graphic designer from Atlanta. Her life had been far from easy, but she carried herself with quiet strength, even when the weight of the world seemed to press down on her shoulders. Maya was 5 months pregnant, and this trip marked one of the most important moments of her life. Just days earlier, she had traveled to New York for a job interview at a prestigious design firm, a position that could change everything for her and her unborn child. Maya's journey to this point hadn't been smooth. Raised by a single mother who worked tirelessly to make ends meet, Maya learned early on the value of hard work and resilience. She excelled in school, earning scholarships that allowed her to attend college despite their financial struggles. After graduation, she started freelancing, taking on small projects to build her portfolio while working part-time jobs to support herself. When she discovered she was pregnant, the news came as both a blessing and a challenge. Determined to give her child a better life, Maya poured all her energy into securing stable employment. That's why this flight meant so much to her. If she landed the job, it would provide health benefits, maternity leave, and a steady income, things she desperately needed. The interview had gone well, or at least she hoped it had. Now, as she sat on the plane, her mind replayed every detail. The way she answered each question, the portfolio she presented, and the encouraging smile of the hiring manager. For the first time in months, she felt a glimmer of hope. But hope didn't erase exhaustion. The long day of interviews, combined with the physical toll of pregnancy, left Maya drained. She adjusted her seatbelt carefully, trying to find a comfortable position. Her swollen feet ached, and the pressure on her lower back made it hard to sit still. Still, she remained quiet, not wanting to draw attention to herself. She pulled out a book, hoping to distract herself until the plane took off. Charles barely noticed her at first. To him, she was just another passenger, someone whose existence barely registered. But as he glanced sideways, his eyes lingered on her appearance. Her clothes were simple, practical, and slightly worn. Her hair was tied back in a loose bun, and there were faint circles under her eyes. None of this screamed first-class traveler to Charles. In his mind, people in first class looked polished, confident, and wealthy, not tired, unassuming, and visibly pregnant. His irritation grew as he watched her shift uncomfortably again. Why couldn't she sit still? Didn't she realize how disruptive she was being? Charles clenched his jaw, annoyed by what he perceived as her lack of manners. He convinced himself that she must have gotten her ticket through some kind of charity program or discount. He refused to believe she belonged here on her own merit. What Charles failed to see was the determination in Maya's eyes, the quiet pride she carried despite her circumstances. He didn't know about the sacrifices she'd made to get where she was today or the dreams she held close to her heart. All he saw was someone who didn't fit his narrow definition of success. And as the plane taxied down the runway, preparing for takeoff, Charles's growing frustration set the stage for a confrontation neither of them could have anticipated. For now, though, Maya remained unaware of the storm brewing beside her. She focused on staying calm, breathing deeply, and imagining the future she was fighting so hard to create. Little did she know, her quiet strength would soon become the center of an event that would ripple far beyond the confines of this airplane. The plane had barely reached cruising altitude when Charles's simmering irritation boiled over. He tried to ignore Maya, burying himself in his tablet and sipping champagne, but her presence gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't scratch. Every small movement she made, the rustle of her sweater, the soft sigh as she shifted in her seat, felt like an intrusion into his carefully controlled world. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, Charles turned to her with a scowl. "Excuse me," he began, his tone sharp enough to cut glass. "I don't mean to be rude, but are you sure you're supposed to be sitting here?" Maya looked up from the book she'd been reading, startled by the sudden question. She blinked, unsure if she'd heard him correctly. "I'm sorry," she replied softly, her voice tinged with confusion. "This is first class," Charles continued, his words dripping with condescension. "It's not exactly affordable for everyone. So how did you manage it? Some kind of charity program? Or did someone buy your ticket for you?" The cabin fell eerily quiet. A few nearby passengers glanced up from their magazines or laptops, curiosity piqued by the tension crackling in the air. Maya felt her cheeks flush, embarrassment warring with disbelief. She hadn't expected this kind of hostility, especially not on a flight where she was simply trying to get home. "I bought my own ticket," she said firmly, though her voice trembled slightly. "With my own money." Charles raised an eyebrow, clearly unconvinced. "Really? And what do you do for a living that allows you to afford something like this?" "I'm a graphic designer," Maya answered, clutching her book tightly in her lap. "I saved up for months so I could come to New York for a job interview. I thought traveling comfortably would make the trip easier, given my condition." She gestured faintly toward her belly, her tone polite but firm. But Charles wasn't satisfied. If anything, her explanation only fueled his disdain. "A graphic designer?" He scoffed, his voice rising just enough to carry to the surrounding rows. "Let me guess, you used some crowdfunding site or relied on handouts to scrape together the cash. People like you always find ways to take shortcuts." Maya's jaw tightened. "People like me," she repeated, her voice steadier now, carrying a hint of steel beneath the calm. "What does that even mean?" Charles leaned back in his seat, crossing one leg over the other as if delivering a lecture. You know exactly what I mean. Someone in your situation doesn't belong here. First class is for people who've earned it, not for those looking for handouts. By now, the entire cabin seemed to be listening. Passengers exchanged uneasy glances, some shaking their heads while others pulled out their phones to record the escalating confrontation. Maya's hands gripped the armrests of her seat, her knuckles turning white. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. Instead, she took a deep breath, willing herself to stay composed. "You have no idea what I've worked for," she said quietly, her words laced with quiet dignity. "And frankly, it's none of your business how I paid for my ticket. But if you're so concerned about who belongs here, maybe you should look in the mirror and ask yourself why you feel the need to tear others down." For a moment, Charles was silent, taken aback by her response. But instead of backing down, his face reddened with anger. "Don't try to lecture me," he snapped. "I built everything I have from scratch. I didn't rely on anyone's charity to get where I am." "And neither did I," Maya shot back, her voice stronger now. "But unlike you, I don't judge people based on what they look like or where they sit." The tension between them hung heavy in the air, palpable and unrelenting. For all his wealth and power, Charles suddenly seemed smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of his own arrogance. Meanwhile, Maya sat tall, her quiet strength shining through despite the humiliation he'd tried to heap upon her. Unbeknownst to either of them, the video clips capturing the exchange were already spreading online, sparking outrage and sympathy in equal measure. What Charles didn't realize was that his actions had set off a chain reaction, one that would soon bring his carefully constructed empire crashing down around him. As the confrontation between Charles and Maya unfolded, several passengers discreetly recorded the scene on their phones. The footage quickly made its way onto social media platforms, accompanied by captions like "Billionaire shames pregnant woman on flight" and "Privilege at its worst." Within minutes, the video went viral, spreading across Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok like wildfire. By the time the plane touched down in London, millions of people had seen it, and they weren't holding back their opinions. Among those watching was Marcus Langley, the CEO of Novatech Industries, the very company Charles was scheduled to meet with later that day. Marcus had been looking forward to finalizing a multi-million-dollar partnership that would revolutionize both companies' futures. But as he watched the clip of Charles berating Maya, his excitement turned to disgust. "What an absolute disgrace," Marcus muttered under his breath, shaking his head as he replayed the video. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The man he'd admired for his business acumen now seemed like nothing more than a bully, a symbol of unchecked privilege and entitlement. To make matters worse, Marcus happened to be seated just 2 rows behind Charles during the incident. Though he hadn't intervened at the time, the memory of Charles's cruel words stuck with him. Without hesitation, Marcus picked up his phone and called his assistant. "Cancel the meeting with Whitmore," he said firmly. "We're done doing business with him." "But sir," his assistant stammered, caught off guard. "This deal has been months in the making." "Are you sure?" "I'm positive," Marcus replied. "A man who treats others this way doesn't deserve our trust or our money. Send out a statement canceling the partnership, and let's move on." While Marcus acted swiftly, the public outrage continued to grow. Hashtags like #JusticeForMaya and #BoycottWhitmoreCorp began trending worldwide. People shared stories of their own experiences with discrimination and privilege, turning Maya's ordeal into a rallying cry for change. News outlets picked up the story, airing segments about corporate accountability and the dangers of unchecked power. Overnight, Charles Whitmore became a household name, but not in the way he'd ever imagined. Back on the plane, neither Charles nor Maya realized the magnitude of what was happening outside their immediate surroundings. As the aircraft descended toward Heathrow Airport, Charles leaned back in his seat, still fuming over the argument. In his mind, He'd done nothing wrong. He was simply pointing out the truth. How could anyone misunderstand that? Meanwhile, Maya stared out the window, her heart heavy but resolute. She'd hoped to leave the confrontation behind her, focusing instead on the future she was building for her child. But as the plane taxied to the gate, the reality of the situation became impossible to ignore. Reporters swarmed the arrival area, cameras flashing and microphones thrust forward as passengers disembarked. When Maya stepped off the plane, she was met with cheers and applause from strangers who recognized her from the videos. Some even approached her to offer words of encouragement or ask if they could help in any way. Charles, however, received a very different welcome. As soon as he appeared, reporters bombarded him with questions. Why did you humiliate that pregnant woman? Do you think your behavior reflects poorly on your company? What do you have to say to your critics? Flustered and unprepared, Charles pushed past them without comment, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. By the time he reached the terminal, the damage was already done. Notifications poured into his phone, emails from investors pulling out, messages from partners severing ties, and countless comments slamming his character. His net worth plummeted as stocks tied to his businesses nosedived. Companies he endorsed distanced themselves publicly, fearing association with his tarnished reputation. Even his closest allies began questioning whether standing by him was worth the risk. For Charles, the fall from grace was swift and brutal. One moment, he was untouchable. The next, he was vilified. And though he tried to rationalize what had happened, blaming the media, blaming the passengers who recorded him, blaming anyone but himself, he couldn't escape the sinking realization that his actions had consequences far beyond anything he'd anticipated. Karma, it seemed, had struck instantly and mercilessly. The fallout from the viral video was relentless, and Charles Whitmore found himself at the center of a media storm unlike anything he'd ever experienced. By the time he reached his London hotel, his phone was buzzing non-stop with urgent messages, angry emails, and breaking news alerts. His once pristine reputation was crumbling faster than he could process. Reporters camped outside his hotel, shouting questions through the lobby doors, while social media users dissected every aspect of his life, from his business practices to his personal relationships. It felt like the entire world had turned against him. Desperate to salvage what little remained of his public image, Charles called an emergency meeting with his PR team. They gathered in a private suite at the hotel, their faces grim as they reviewed the damage. "We need to act fast," one of them said. "People are calling for boycotts and brands are pulling out left and right. If we don't address this now, it's going to get worse." Charles listened silently, his usual confidence replaced by a growing sense of panic. For the first time in his life, he felt powerless. The PR team suggested issuing a public apology, a carefully crafted statement expressing regret for his behavior on a flight. Reluctantly, Charles agreed. He recorded a video later that evening, standing in front of a sleek backdrop designed to convey sincerity. "I want to apologize for my actions on the flight earlier today," he began, his tone measured but lacking genuine emotion. "I was frustrated and spoke out of turn. That's no excuse, and I deeply regret any harm I caused. My words do not reflect who I am or the values I strive to uphold." He ended the statement by promising to learn from the experience and be more mindful in the future. The video was released within hours, accompanied by hashtags like #growthmindset and #accountability. But the response was far from forgiving. Critics dismissed the apology as insincere, pointing out that Charles hadn't directly addressed the racism and classism underlying his comments. Others accused him of trying to manipulate the situation for publicity. Instead of calming the backlash, the apology only fueled further outrage. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson became an unexpected symbol of resilience and dignity. Social media users rallied around her, praising her composure during the confrontation and sharing their admiration for her quiet strength. A GoFundMe campaign started by a stranger quickly gained traction, raising tens of thousands of dollars to support Maya and her unborn child. Messages of encouragement poured in from all over the world, with many people expressing how inspired they were by her grace under pressure. When reporters approached Maya outside her apartment building in Atlanta, she handled the attention with humility. "I never asked for this kind of spotlight," she told them, clutching her stomach protectively. "But if my story can help bring attention to the issues so many women like me face every day, then maybe something good can come out of it." Despite the overwhelming support, Maya remained grounded. She declined interviews with major networks, choosing instead to focus on her goals. With the funds raised through the GoFundMe campaign, she paid off lingering medical bills, secured stable housing, and invested in courses to enhance her skills as a graphic designer. Her priority was clear: creating a better future for her child. Back in London, Charles watched as his empire continued to crumble. Investors withdrew their support, luxury brands terminated endorsement deals, and high-profile events uninvited him. Even his closest friends distanced themselves, unwilling to be associated with his tarnished name. Alone in his hotel room, Charles stared at the glowing screen of his laptop, scrolling through endless headlines about his downfall. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to feel the weight of his actions and the emptiness they had left behind. In a last-ditch effort to make amends, Charles decided to reach out to Maya personally. Through his lawyer, he offered her a substantial sum of money in exchange for a public statement forgiving him. To his surprise, and perhaps relief, Maya politely declined. In a handwritten letter sent via email, she explained her decision. "Money won't fix what you've done, not to me, and not to the countless others who face discrimination because of people like you," she wrote. "What I hope you'll do is take this moment to reflect on your actions and understand why they mattered. Real change comes from within, not from a checkbook." Her words struck a chord deep inside Charles, though he wasn't ready to admit it yet. As he sat alone in his dimly lit hotel room, staring at her letter on the screen, he couldn't shake the feeling that his life would never be the same again. Charles Whitmore's life had become unrecognizable. Once a man who commanded respect and admiration, he now found himself ostracized, his name synonymous with arrogance and cruelty. The collapse of his empire was swift and merciless. His company's stock plummeted, forcing him to sell off assets just to keep it afloat. Luxury brands that once clamored to feature him in their campaigns severed ties without hesitation. Even his private jet, the ultimate symbol of his wealth, was repossessed when he couldn't make the payments. For the first time in decades, Charles was forced to live like everyone else. He returned to New York after the disastrous trip to London, moving into a modest apartment far from the penthouse suites he used to call home. With no staff to cater to his every need, he had to learn how to cook, clean, and manage basic tasks he'd long taken for granted. At first, these chores frustrated him. They felt beneath someone of his stature. But as weeks turned into months, something shifted inside him. Stripped of his wealth and status, Charles began seeing the world through a different lens. He noticed the struggles of people around him. The single mother working 2 jobs at the coffee shop where he bought his morning latte, the elderly janitor mopping floors late at night, the young man delivering groceries with dreams of going to college. These were lives he'd never paid attention to before, but now they seemed vivid and real. To make ends meet, Charles took on odd jobs, something he hadn't done since his early 20s. He worked as a cashier at a local supermarket, stocked shelves at a hardware store, and even delivered packages for a courier service. Each job humbled him further, exposing him to the daily grind of those he'd once dismissed. Customers sometimes recognized him, sneering or mocking him under their breath. Others treated him kindly, unaware of his past. Either way, Charles learned to swallow his pride and keep moving forward. Meanwhile, Maya Johnson continued to thrive. She used the funds raised through the GoFundMe campaign to launch a nonprofit organization called Rising Mothers, dedicated to supporting underprivileged women during pregnancy and beyond. The initiative provided resources like free prenatal care, parenting workshops, and mentorship programs. Maya also partnered with local businesses to create job opportunities for single mothers, helping them achieve financial independence. Her work earned widespread recognition, and she became a sought-after speaker at conferences and community events. One evening, while volunteering at a food bank, Maya overheard a conversation between two volunteers about a former billionaire who had fallen from grace. They mentioned Charles by name, describing how he now worked menial jobs to survive. Maya listened quietly, her heart softening despite herself. She knew all too well the pain of judgment and hardship, and though Charles's actions on the flight still stung, she couldn't help but feel a flicker of empathy for his plight. Around the same time, Charles decided to take another step toward redemption. He reached out to Maya again, this time not through lawyers or intermediaries, but personally. He wrote her a heartfelt letter, apologizing once more for his behavior and expressing gratitude for the lessons her strength had taught him. "I don't expect forgiveness," he admitted, "but I want you to know that your words have stayed with me. You've changed the way I see the world and myself." Maya read the letter several times, weighing her emotions. While she wasn't ready to forgive him completely, she appreciated his sincerity. In her response, she invited him to attend a fundraising gala for rising mothers. "If you truly mean what you say," she wrote, "this is your chance to show it. Use your platform to uplift others instead of tearing them down." Charles accepted the invitation, knowing it was a small step toward rebuilding trust, not just with Maya, but with society as a whole. As he prepared for the event, he realized that true redemption wouldn't come overnight. It would require patience, humility, and consistent effort. But for the first time in years, Charles felt hopeful. Perhaps there was still a way to turn his life around, not by reclaiming his old identity, but by embracing a new one. The night of the Rising Mothers Gala arrived, and Charles Whitmore stood outside the venue, nervously adjusting his tie. It was a far cry from the designer suits he used to wear, but it was clean, pressed, and respectable, just like the new version of himself he was trying to build. For weeks, he had rehearsed what he would say if anyone asked why he was there. He knew eyes would be on him, judging his presence at an event hosted by the very woman he had humiliated. But this time, instead of running from judgment, he chose to face it head-on. Inside, the room buzzed with energy. Guests mingled over hors d'oeuvres, discussing Maya's inspiring journey and the impact of her nonprofit. Photographs of smiling mothers and children lined the walls, each image telling a story of hope and resilience. When Maya took the stage to deliver her opening speech, the crowd erupted into applause. She spoke passionately about the challenges faced by underprivileged women and the importance of community support in overcoming adversity. Her words were powerful, yet filled with warmth, a reflection of the grace she carried even in the face of hardship. When she finished speaking, Maya paused and looked directly at Charles, who sat quietly near the back of the room. "Tonight," she said, her voice steady, "we welcome someone who has walked a difficult path toward change. His actions once caused harm, but I believe people can grow if they're willing to listen and learn. Tonight, he is here not as a guest, but as a volunteer ready to contribute however he can." The room fell silent, all eyes turning to Charles. He felt the weight of their stares, some curious, others skeptical. Slowly, he rose from his seat and approached the stage. Taking a deep breath, he began to speak. "I won't pretend that standing here today is easy," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "What I did on that flight was wrong, not just because it hurt Maya, but because it reflected a mindset I'm deeply ashamed of. I judged people based on appearances, wealth, and privilege, forgetting that everyone carries struggles I could never understand. Losing everything forced me to see the world differently. It showed me the value of kindness, humility, and second chances." He went on to thank Maya for extending the invitation and promised to dedicate his time and remaining resources to supporting her cause. "I don't expect forgiveness," he concluded, "but I hope my actions moving forward will show that I'm committed to being better, for myself, for others, and for the future we're all trying to build together." The audience responded with cautious applause, unsure whether to fully trust his words but willing to give him the benefit of the doubt. Afterward, several attendees approached Charles, sharing their own stories of struggle and redemption. Some expressed gratitude for his honesty. Others challenged him to prove his commitment through action. Charles listened intently, grateful for every interaction, no matter how uncomfortable. Over the following months, Charles threw himself into volunteering with Rising Mothers. He helped organize fundraising events, coordinated donation drives, and mentored young fathers seeking stable employment. Though he still faced criticism from those who doubted his sincerity, he didn't let it deter him. Every small victory, a mother finding a job, a family securing housing, reinforced his belief that he was on the right path. For Maya, watching Charles transform was bittersweet. While she appreciated his efforts, she remained guarded, knowing that trust takes time to rebuild. Still, she couldn't deny the positive impact he was making. One evening, after a particularly successful charity event, she pulled him aside. "You've come a long way," she said softly. "But remember, real change isn't about grand gestures. It's about consistency. Keep showing up, keep listening, and keep learning." Charles nodded, meeting her gaze with genuine gratitude. "Thank you, Maya," he replied. "Not just for giving me this chance, but for teaching me what true strength looks like." As they parted ways, both realized they were on journeys of their own. Maya continuing to inspire others with her resilience, and Charles working tirelessly to redefine his legacy. Together, they proved that even the most broken paths can lead to growth, healing, and renewal. Years passed, and the lives of Charles Whitmore and Maya Johnson continued to evolve in ways neither could have predicted. The ripple effects of that fateful flight stretched far beyond the two individuals, touching countless lives and sparking meaningful conversations about privilege, accountability, and redemption. Charles, once a symbol of unchecked arrogance, had transformed into an advocate for change. His work with Rising Mothers became a cornerstone of his new identity. He used his business acumen to streamline operations, secure partnerships, and expand the nonprofit's reach. Under his guidance, the organization opened new centers across the country, offering resources not only to mothers, but also to fathers striving to break cycles of poverty. Though he still encountered skepticism from some quarters, Charles earned respect through consistent action. People began to see him less as the man who had fallen from grace, and more as someone determined to rise again, not for himself, but for others. Maya, meanwhile, flourished both personally and professionally. Her nonprofit grew into a national movement, inspiring communities to come together and support one another. She published a memoir titled Strength in Stillness, recounting her experiences on the flight and the lessons she learned about resilience, dignity, and the power of collective action. The book became a bestseller, further amplifying her message of hope and empowerment. Beyond her professional achievements, Maya found joy in raising her son Elijah, who was now a bright and curious 6-year-old. Together, they volunteered at local shelters, instilling in him the values of compassion and service. One crisp autumn afternoon, Charles and Maya crossed paths again at a community event hosted by Rising Mothers. It was a celebration of the organization's 5th anniversary, complete with speeches, performances, and heartfelt testimonials from families whose lives had been changed. As Charles stood near the refreshment table, watching children laugh and play, Maya approached him with a warm smile. "You've done good work," she said simply, her tone sincere. "I wasn't sure I'd ever say that to you, but it's true." Charles felt a lump form in his throat. "Thank you, Maya. That means more than I can put into words. None of this would have been possible without your example and your willingness to give me a chance when no one else would." They stood side by side for a moment, reflecting on how far they'd both come. Maya glanced at Elijah, who was busy drawing pictures with chalk on the sidewalk. "He reminds me of you sometimes," she admitted. "Not because he's stubborn or prideful," she added quickly, laughing softly, "but because he never gives up, no matter how hard things get." Charles chuckled, feeling a pang of affection for the boy who represented everything Maya fought for. If he grows up to be even half the person you are, Maya, the world will be lucky. Their conversation shifted to lighter topics, upcoming projects, shared goals, and plans for the future. For the first time, there was ease between them, a sense that they were equals working toward a common purpose. Maya didn't offer forgiveness outright. Scars like hers ran deep, and healing took time. But she acknowledged Charles's growth and encouraged him to keep using his platform for good. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting golden light over the gathering, Maya stepped onto the stage to deliver closing remarks. Addressing the crowd, she spoke about the importance of second chances, not just for those who make mistakes, but for society itself. We all have the capacity to grow, to change, and to contribute, she said, her voice resonating with conviction. But it takes courage to confront our flaws and humility to learn from them. Tonight, we celebrate not just what we've accomplished, but the belief that everyone deserves a chance to rewrite their story. When the event ended, Charles lingered behind to help clean up, chatting with volunteers and thanking attendees for their support. As he walked home under the starlit sky, he felt a quiet sense of peace. Redemption wasn't a destination. It was a journey, one he was committed to walking every day. In different ways, both Charles and Maya had found redemption. Maya through her unwavering strength and ability to inspire others, and Charles through his determination to rebuild himself from the ground up. Their stories served as reminders that even in moments of darkness, there is always room for light, and that true transformation begins when we choose to see the humanity in one another.